各位观众朋友们，大家好，欢迎收看 JxJ 论坛，由我马健 Jimmy 马与我们的好朋友 Jim Noteware 为我们一起讨论这个礼拜的时事。How you doing, Jim?
Hi, Jimmy. I'm doing fine. Interesting thing happened.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, well, I was going to say that last week unfortunately we had our summer break and we weren't able to tape, and it felt like a part of my life was missing. Something wasn't right all week. And I realize it now is the fact that we didn't get to talk to our audience last week. Now, you mentioned something very interesting earlier about what you heard on a radio program. Can we expand that a little bit to our audience?
Sure. There is in Houston, there is a very well-respected radio program offered by NPR, National Public Radio, called Houston Matters. And this past Tuesday, Bill Fulton, urban research at Rice University. He talked about a new housing study that Kinder had done regarding the Houston region. And one of the aspects they found in doing this research is that Houston's growth is slowing. Now, that's very significant because Houston has always prided itself on being one of the fastest growing places in the country. And that growth has in turn created Houston's prosperity, which in turn creates the magnet for more and more people to want to come here. So the concept that that growth is slowing is very significant. But it's even more significant. The city of Houston, its growth has actually gone negative. In other words, in this last census, the population of Houston, the city of Houston, has shrunk. And the surrounding county of Houston, Harris County, has flattened. Meanwhile, the entire Houston region, which is 9 counties, continues to be the second fastest growing region in the country after Dallas-Fort Worth, just ahead of Phoenix. So South continues to grow. Texas and Arizona, as business-friendly states, continue to grow. But the core of the Houston region is hollowing out. And that is very, very significant because without growth, opportunity, the core of the Houston economic success and the core of the Houston identity all goes away. And if you extrapolate this, some very dangerous trends are already beginning to form. It will be impossible to fund our public pensions. It will be impossible to create the infrastructure for flood relief and flood mitigation. It will be impossible to provide enough public services to support the needs of part of our population. And we're not alone in this. For instance, one of the things that Mr. Fulton cited was New York City went through a significant period of contraction, which he didn't identify, but that was in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. But then he said New York resumed its growth, which it did in the 90s and the last 2 decades. But what he didn't say, which was critically important, is why and how New York reversed course and was able to successfully reestablish growth. It started with dramatically reducing crime. When Rudy Giuliani was elected mayor in 1991 after David Dinkins, there were over 2,400 murders in 1990 in New York City. And over the next 20 years, that more than 2,400 murders went to fewer than 400, an 80% decline in violent crime. And of course, Everybody knows that New York surged. Wall Street surged, Madison Avenue, news media, everything became very successful in New York. Now, leave aside the problems of the pandemic. I think New York will reestablish itself. But point is, New York had to dramatically address its weak spots. And I don't think Houston is anywhere near prepared to do that self-analysis that New York did.
I absolutely understand that urban flight is a problem that we as Houstonians are not addressing. However, when you bring up New York, Rudy, his term as mayor, we knew he was successful. That's what, made his name first as district attorney for the Southern District. But the crime rate in New York now, it is horrendous. If you look it up, if our audience take a look at it, New York's in trouble.
Yeah.
But the success of Rudy's term, cleaning it up, came with a very controversial tactic, which violated a lot of people's civil rights. It was the right to frisk and search. The city of New York their police force had the right to stop someone and search them without probable cause. Now, did that relate directly to stemming crime? Because right now, would you go to Times Square? No. My native New Yorker friends tell me, don't go to Times Square. And they tell me that this urban flight, because of the pandemic, a lot of people are not going back. A lot of these Fortune 500 companies they're trying to force their workers to go back to the office. They're trying, but it will never be the same. Now, New York is New York. We want to talk about Houston because this is our home. And as a former publicly elected official, as a public servant, your concerns are for the general wealth and well-being of every citizen of the city of Houston. So I absolutely agree that crime and prosperity and growth is related. None of us, we're normal citizens. Nobody wants to live in a segregated, gated society where the rich is richer and there's no more middle class and the poor is poorer. And that's what the city of Houston will become. You have the gated communities of River Oaks and Memorial Villages with their own patrol, or the city of Bel Air. And then you have basically urban decay and public housing and just a mess. And what you mentioned about flood mitigation, about public services, there is not going to be enough voters, not enough taxes to get that. And it's the suburbs benefiting from this. From what you said, the counties surrounding Harris, it's the 9 counties is flat also. So where did everybody go? And how do we reverse this course? If you were in charge, how would you reverse this course, Jim?
I would start by making everyone aware of what the reality actually is. If you tell people, or when Mr. Fulton and others, this news gets out, and by the way, it's not news. The Houston population has been flat for at least 3 decades.
Has it?
Yes. Harris County has been growing by leaps and bounds. So that transition from up to flat is news. But there's a truism in business that you can't solve a problem unless you know what it is. And most people in Houston bask in the glow of Texas's growth, and they infer that Houston and Harris County follow along with the remainder of Texas and the remainder of our region, as I mentioned before. But if you tell people that is not factually accurate, that we have a problem here in Houston, we need to tell people the truth. And we need to then, secondly, diagnose what is causing the problem. Let me give you 1 or 2 examples. The costs of living in Houston are going up dramatically. And why is that? 1, the city has imposed impact fees. So if you are a real estate developer and try to add new housing in the city of Houston, you have to pay about $35,000 to $50,000 to the city of Houston in order to get permission to build the house. So where does that come from? The developer has to pass the costs on to somebody new. It's what California is doing, and it's exactly why so many people are moving from California to Texas, but not into Houston, right? Second thing, you have to do what New York did for crime, but one of the things I failed to mention when I mentioned about Rudy Giuliani's reduction in crime and also Michael Bloomberg's is that he started with what's called the broken window theory. In other words, when you have signs of minor urban decay, graffiti, broken windows, potholes, the most important thing you must do is fix them. You must demonstrate care. You must demonstrate the fact that people take care of things, because once something begins to deteriorate, it gets worse and worse and worse. So there are many other examples of that, and we must address the universe of the quality of public services that are deteriorating. There is no question. There's two fundamentals here. Number one, if you want a healthy real estate market and successful growth, you must have a strong educational system. The education in Houston is the worst in the state. In fact, it is so bad that the state of Texas is poised to take over and run the city's Houston Independent School District, because the elected board and its employees simply cannot do so. Similarly with crime. Now, the entire country is going through a crime epidemic right now, so we can't single out Houston. In fact, while Houston's crime is going up, it's going up less so than in many other places. But nevertheless, it is still a major, major jolt to Houston, because people have enjoyed safety and security in Houston for a very long time. And to have this new, it is scaring people away. The next thing to do, Jimmy, is to identify growth as an objective. There's another truism in business: you get what you measure. And so by setting a target and say we must grow, then people will begin to figure out how to do things. For instance, again, if you want to have growth, the best thing to do is encourage real estate developers to come in and develop in the city. You need to make it easier to get permits. For instance, Houston is well known for being one of the most difficult places to get building permits in the entire country. It is as bad as New York. It is as bad as San Francisco. And it's been known that way for a very long time.
Yes.
Heretofore, developers have tolerated that because Houston has had good markets in some segments. But it's coming to be so bad that people are just simply bypassing and going elsewhere.
Why is that happening, Jim? Is it a failure on the city of Houston's permitting,
yes,
housing and development?
Very much so. Very much so. It's a bureaucracy that's out of control, that is not accountable to anyone, including, most especially, the constituents it serves. And I'm not telling anybody that's in the business knows that this is true.
Oh, yeah. Anyone in this business knows that.
Yes. Well known. So at any rate, but I think the most important thing is, like we've talked about on our programs for the last several months, transparency, telling the truth, addressing things head on, and paying the constituents, the voters, the taxpayers, the compliment that they can handle the truth and that they are people of goodwill. And when they know the truth, they, in their own ways as individuals and collectively, will not only help come up with solutions to fix the problem, but they will join together to make it happen across the city, across the county, and stimulate things. People, particularly in Houston, have a great civic spirit. And I think what we should do is engage people and set a vision for it. When you talk to our public leaders, all they're talking about is how to cure yesterday's social complaint. They're not really addressing flood control issues, which is, we've talked about many times, an existential threat to Houston. The only solution for crime prevention is to hire more police. That is necessary, but that's not the only factor. We have judges who let people out without bail, and most of the violent crime in Houston is caused by approximately 20 to 30 people who are out on 5, 6, 7 bonds of prior offenses. In other words, somebody that's killed somebody once is out again, kills somebody twice, kills somebody 3 times, kills somebody 4 times, and it's up to 7 and 8 for approximately 30 different individuals. In other words, if you kept 30 people behind bars, our crime rate would go down very significantly. So this is politics as well as it is social policy. And it's a damn shame.
It's, there's always going to be 2 sides to the narrative. We look at Houston, we look at San Francisco. It's a crime epidemic.
It's a crime epidemic.
I mean, it is horrendous. And in Houston, we could talk about the district attorney. We could talk about our bond issues. What is the standards and repeat offenders? Now, I see a lot of rank and file police officers very defeated because they could arrest somebody in the morning and see them walk the streets again in the afternoon.
Yeah.
How do we keep
one of the things they're finding now in Houston, as well as in San Francisco or New York or other cities, Washington, D.C. as
Chicago.
well, Chicago as well, is the police say, why should I put myself in harm's way? Why should I chase a violent criminal when I'm successful in arresting him, booking him, taking him in, if the judge just lets him go? And next week, we'll do the same thing all over again. Why should I do this? So what then happens is the police say, why bother? And they don't do it. And then the bad guys understand that, and they have free rein. And so a negative cycle gets worse and worse and worse. What it all comes down to, Jimmy, is leadership and setting priorities and having standards that you adhere to. I know precious few political leaders who really want to do the nitty-gritty of actually managing the discipline that it takes to provide public services, beginning with public safety, but many other things as well.
But Jim, first of all, you have to ask for elected officials or potential folks that wants to run for office. How do you set aside political ideology and not be dragged down by preconceived misconceptions, and set it aside and realize that crime is something that affects everyone, that needs to be addressed? Education, urban decay, urban flight. Over the past few months, we've talked a lot. We focus more on local politics and local issues, because having the foresight to see that this will affect us 10 and 20 or 30 years down the road, because we've seen examples, like you said, Detroit, and we're seeing San Francisco, New York's in trouble, Baltimore, great example. And now they started to rebuild the waterfront, but that's from developer money. People are just getting moved out the way. I mean, there is never a perfect solution, but the fact is that prosperity and economic development comes with a price. And But nobody wants to be victims of crime. Nobody wants to pay taxes and not receive the services that was included.
But excuse me for interrupting, Jimmy, but taxes are a very interesting topic. Nobody really likes to pay taxes, but most people will pay taxes.
Yes, I'm very willing to pay my fair share or pay a little bit more because we've been fortunate enough, blessed to have a income level that gives us the opportunity to do more. But like I said, I don't want to be single-mindedly to increase my wealth just so that I can move to a bigger, better, safer neighborhood with higher walls and private security, and just so that I could. No, I don't want my kids to grow up that way. I didn't grow up that way.
I know that. In the real estate world, we call that the Mexican or the Italian solution.
Because look at what's going on in their country.
In Mexico, it's
a narco state.
Live behind gates and walls.
Even then is not safe because they still have to go out and eat. So you can only go to the same restaurant, go to the same hotel, eat on the same town, basically have your own private security. That is not a society. That is not a community.
You cannot have a society. And so what's happening, and Mexico is an extreme example, but it's also happening to a larger degree here. We're having a smaller number of rich people get richer and richer and get more and more isolated, where more and more other people are slipping down into greater levels of poverty. And the economic pyramid is getting much wider at the bottom. And as you said to me earlier this afternoon, this is exactly the opposite of what made America great. What made America great is the ability of people to come in and move up the ladder, not fall down the ladder.
Social mobility is very important for people to have a goal and to know that if you work hard, you will have a way to provide for your family, and you could economic status will be moved up. Anybody can make in this country. Yep. Now it is not the same. That does not apply anymore. Right. The criteria is higher and higher. Now, granted, to be fair, it's happening all over the world, right? This wealth gap is the have and have nots. Everywhere is happening. Yeah. Now, Jim, I hate to bring this up. I like to talk about things that make us happy. We never get to talk about your summer vacation tips. And I see a surfboard on the wall and behind you.
Yeah, that's my friend's surfboard. He goes surfing all the time in Israel. Yep.
And it's at your house.
Yeah. No, this is at my office.
This is your office.
One of my offices. And at any rate,
you're not home right now. I see.
No.
You're recording from office. That makes sense because that's a very nice surfboard, and that makes me want to be somewhere else in Bali or Hawaii or one of my places where but we're here in Houston, and I wouldn't call anywhere else home. Now, Jim, I hate to bring this up, but what is your take on our national news making state representative that is holding out in Washington, D.C., and what is our governor, Mr. Abbott, thinking by threatening to arrest him? I mean, this is just a whole mess all over, very politicized, but I'm sure we have very strong opinions about it. I want to hear your take on it first.
Well, there's really two issues. One is the fundamental substance of what the Democrats who left are actually protesting about, which is the new Texas legislation actually attempting to restrict voting by some parts of our population. I do not happen to believe that it is. Texas has very, very open and frequent and very flexible voting, far more than most other states, including, of course, the example that is often offered, Delaware. Texas does. Texas has early voting, et cetera, et cetera. The key sticking point is showing ID to come to vote. And that's what it's all about. But Texas has always had that ID requirement. That is nothing new. But there is a disagreement about what is in the bill. But then the second issue is what the Democrats are doing in order to thwart the creation of the new voting law by leaving and robbing the state of having a quorum. My 2 cents are to let them stay there. Let them stay there, and we'll just go on, and we'll just go on, and we'll just go on. Sooner or later, they come back. But Governor Abbott, who used to be the Attorney General of Texas, he is someone who knows Texas law better than anyone else. He's already got a judicial opinion that when the people do come back to the state, they can be arrested and be brought into the state house in order to compel their participation and establish a quorum. So it's a waiting game. And
could you imagine in a Democrat-controlled state, say California, where the governor decides to do that to the minority Republican state reps? You know what kind of uproar that would create? That you're arresting elected public officials in order to force a quorum. First of all, let's take away what we think, what we agree or disagree on, which we already know. It'll take a lot longer than the period of a show to disagree on what entails fair voting and why it matters that everyone could vote, and why restrictive voting doesn't matter to working class and minorities and blue collar folks. Let's take aside that. Let's just talk about how is the Governor Abbott not overstepping his powers and his boundaries. I think he's drunk on his own power. He wants to be a star. And all this still pertains to the big lie, to Mr. Trump's claim that he is still the commander-in-chief, that the election was stolen. I mean, all this comes down to still holding out that. How can we let that drag us into this new year, to the next year?
You know, I don't think that has anything to do with the Texas bill. I think if you sit down and look at provision by provision in the Texas bill, all the new proposed changes, in my mind, are benign. I don't see what the issues actually are to complain about it. I think it's part of the larger grandstanding in order to help the national Democrats support what's called H.R. 1 and establish national voting standards, which would do away with presentation of ID for voting. No one that I know thinks that presenting an ID to vote is in any way restrictive.
No, it's not. But there's a lot of misconceptions about it. There's a lot of details we can argue. But like I said, the grandstanding on Democrats' part, sure. But when I mentioned Trump and the big lie, yes, to me, Abbott is grandstanding. He is making a star of himself. I mean, what kind of country? What difference is there between us and Russia or Myanmar when we're arresting our elected officials?
Wait a minute. Let's break it down, Jimmy. The governor had nothing to do with the Democrats' decision to leave and therefore eliminate the ability for the legislature to have a quorum. You could blame the Speaker of the House, the Texas House, but the rules are already established. They were in a special session, which was caused because it wasn't able to be voted on during the regular session. And so when that expires, if they don't have a quorum, the governor will just, because it's the governor's responsibility to call a special session, and they'll just keep doing another one. But
I find it humorous that a certain party always used the fact that the rules are established. To me, this pertains to the same thing as redistricting 20 years ago. There was no precedent of redistricting. Tom DeLay found it convenient because Republicans had control of the state representative office, state legislature, and decided to redistrict at a full disadvantage to a certain party. And this year they want to do this because they have full control of it. What was the word you said? Yeah, it's I guess it's no one's responsibility. It's convenient.
Since the Constitution was written, reapportionment has always been the responsibility of state legislatures, and the presiding leadership, in Texas's case, it's Republicans. Now it used to be Democrats. For many, many, many years, until about 20 years ago, it was always Democrats.
But about 20 years ago, Democrats did not redistrict. They did not call for quorums force courts to vote on very controversial laws that Republicans do not agree on. Republicans would have walked out. Republicans would have went in the streets to protest. It will be crying foul, and it will be another resurrection of storming the state capitol.
No, when the Democrats had the control of the state legislature up until 1990, they did all the reapportionment, and that happens in California in the same way. So I actually don't understand what the complaints are all about. And by the way, a lot of people accused Tom DeLay of playing dirty, and he was actually indicted. It cost him his political career.
Oh, he was.
He was convicted, but his conviction was overturned. The Supreme Court said that he did not do anything wrong. That didn't get very much publicity. His career was already ruined, and his reputation was already ruined, but he was exonerated.
That, Jim, thank you. I did not know that.
Yeah, look it up.
I didn't know. I believe you. I definitely believe you. I am very surprised. But like I said, I guess his party abandoned him, used him and abandoned him because he became the sacrificial lamb. Yeah. He was very powerful.
Look, politics is a vicious business, and it's getting more so. And, about 20 years ago, a lot of money began to flow into politics, and people thought, oh, it's going to corrupt politics. And of course it has. And there's a conservative pundit named George Will, who's one of my favorites and always has been. And he said, I don't understand what all the fuss is about. Of course money is going to come into politics. Why? Because the decisions are so important. In other words, people that put the money into politics, it's a good investment because they get a return. And if they don't do it, they stand to lose. So he was saying, I'm just surprised that there isn't more money in politics. And of course, over time, it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And both parties have what's called their swamps, their pool of dirty lobbyists. But that's the way it works. And do I like it? No. I wish there were something else, but nobody's been able to figure out a practical way to change the way that this works. And reapportionment, which is the polite term for gerrymandering, is part of this process.
Thank you for your insights as always. I mean, you're always patient to discuss, but everything you brought up today matters to all of us, and I appreciate the input. It does matter, and we need to continue. I hope next week we could delve deeper into our issues here that affects all of us Estonians, all of us Texans. Jim, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your summer. I hope you had a little summer vacation, and look forward to seeing you.
I'll go surfing with my friend, but
I can't surf. That's the one thing. My brother surfs. The one thing I never learned was surfing.
But no, don't go away again next week, because then we'll come back and we'll have our fix to get back together again and share it with our audience. Okay.
Thank you, Jim. And stay safe. This Delta variant is very dangerous. After I got vaccinated, I started living. I've been taking trips, going out to eat dinner with my friends, reconnecting, living again. And in the last 2 weeks since July 4th, I have 3 coworkers. I have 2 coworkers, and I have 2 personal friends very close to me that were vaccinated and got the Delta variant, became very sick, did not know how they got it, and they regret it because they don't want to get it. They were very sick. They felt like death, and they were very angry that this is happening. And they're warning me. I mean, this is scary.
They're calling COVID the newest STD. Socially transmitted disease.
Well, I know it could be solved. We have the best pharmaceutical industry. I mean, we need a booster shot or whatever it is. The scientists will figure it out. But in the meantime, stay safe, Jim. Stay away from people. Wear your mask.
All right. Got it. All right. Thanks, Jim.
Take care.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yep.